All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to all. Our subject today is the importance of word meanings to good communication. Shirley Davis is going to start us off with a reading that will likely surprise some of us. Go ahead, Shirley.
Take a big breath. I was hungry, so I had to have a sandwich. This essay first appeared in the New York Times in 1986 and is by Gloria Naylor, who was born in Brooklyn in 1950. So she's 10 years younger than I am, and she died in 2016. An author, a professor, an African-American, receiving many literary rewards. So we need to listen to her words. Her first and most famous book was Women of Brewster Place, which was made into a film starring Oprah Winfrey. And I'm going to very liberally read excerpts. These are not all of her words. She had more words from her essay. And the title is The Meanings, Many Meanings of a Word. So this is the essay. Language is the subject. Frustration is experienced by novelists who are aware that whatever we manage to capture in even the most transcendent passages falls far short of the real richness of life. Dialogue achieves its power in the dynamics of a fleeting moment of sight, sound, smell, or touch. And she says, this is her words, I will simply take the position that the spoken word, like the written word, amounts to a nonsensical arrangement of sounds or letters without a consensus that assigns meaning. Building from the meanings of what we hear, we order reality. So words themselves are innocuous. It is the consensus that gives them true power. I remember the first time I heard the word nigger. An angry fellow third grade student spit out that word at me. I couldn't have been more puzzled. I didn't know what a nigger was, but I knew that whatever it meant, it was something he shouldn't have called me. I was later to go home and ask the inevitable question that every Black parent must face. Mommy, what does nigger mean? And what exactly did it mean? Thinking back, I realized this could not have been the first time the word was used in my presence. I was part of a large extended family that had migrated from the rural South after World War II and formed a close-knit network that gravitated around my maternal grandparents. Their ground floor apartment, now this was in Brooklyn, in one of the buildings they owned in Harlem, was a weekend mecca for my immediate family, along with countless aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was a bustling and open house with assorted neighbors and tenants popping in and out to exchange bits of gossip, pick up an old quarrel, referee the ongoing checkers game. They were all there to let down their hair and put up their feet after a week of labor in the factories, laundries, and shipyards of New York. Amid the clamor, which could reach deafening proportions, 2 or 3 conversations going on simultaneously, punctuated by the sound of a baby's crying somewhere in the back rooms or on the street. There was still a rigid set of rules about what was said and how. We'll all identify with this. Older children were sent out of the living room when it was time to get into the juicy details about you know who up on the 3rd floor, who had gone and gotten herself pregnant. Beyond sexual misconduct and death, everything else was considered harmless for our young ears. And so, among the anecdotes of the triumphs and disappointments in the various workings of their lives, the word nigger was used in my presence, but it was set with contexts and inflections that caused it to register in my mind as innocent or not hurting me. So in the singular, The word was always applied to a man who had distinguished himself in some situation that brought their approval for his strength, intelligence, or drive. Did Johnny really do that? I'm telling you, that nigger pulled in $6,000 of overtime last year. Said he got enough for a down payment on a house. So you can see the admiration in that statement. When used with a possessive adjective by a woman, my nigga, it became a term of endearment for her husband or boyfriend, but it could be more than just a term applied to a man. In their mouths, it became the pure essence of manhood, a disembodied force that channeled their past history of struggle and present survival against the odds into a victorious statement of being. Yeah, that old foreman found out quick enough, you don't mess with a nigger. And then in the plural, it became a description of some group within the community that had overstepped the bounds of decency, as my family defined decency. Parents who had neglected their children, a drunken couple who fought in public, people who simply refused to look for work, those with excessively dirty mouths or unkempt households were all trifling niggers. This particular circle could forgive hard times, unemployment, the occasional bout of depression. They had gone through all of that themselves. But the unforgivable sin was a lack of self-respect. And a woman could never be a nigger in the singular with its connotations of confirming worth. The noun girl was its closest equivalent in that sense, but only when used in direct address and regardless of the gender doing the addressing. Girl was a token of respect for a woman. The one syllable word was drawn out to sound like three in recognition of the extra ounce of wit, nerve, or daring that the woman had shown in the situation under discussion. Girl, stop. You mean you said that to his face? I don't agree, and this is Gloria saying this, I don't agree with the argument that the use of the word nigger at this social stratum of the Black community was an internalization of racism. The dynamics were the exact opposite. The people in my grandmother's living room took a word that whites used to signify worthlessness or degradation, and the people in my grandmother's living room rendered that word important. I'm sorry, impotent. It was harmless. If the word was to disappear totally from the mouths of even the most liberal of white society, no one in that room was naive enough to believe it would disappear from white minds. Meeting the word head on, they proved it had absolutely nothing to do with the way they were determined to live their lives. So there must have been dozens of times that nigger was spoken in front of me before I reached the 3rd grade, but I didn't hear it until it was said by a small pair of lips that had already learned it could be a way to humiliate me. That was the word I went home and asked my mother about. Since she knew that I had to grow up in America, she took me in her lap and explained. So, thank you, Charlie, for asking me to read it.
I appreciate that. I mean, that just amazes me. Now, I grew up in Georgia where I saw both ends of the use of that word. And I'm wondering, has anybody else seen nigger used in a positive sense?
Yeah.
Oh, Janet, you have.
Yeah, well, I have an adopted family that's Black, and there was a real bone of contention between my godson and me that he used that word all the time, him being Black. And I just browbeat him until he finally figured out that he wasn't doing himself any good by using that word. But, you know, he called his buddies and his cousins and
And where was this?
outside of Dallas.
Oh, in Dallas, in the deep South. Wow. All right. Well, this story brings out the fact that we all learn words under different circumstances and thus are not likely to understand them in exactly the same way as someone with whom we want to communicate. And then there's the problem expressed by Leonard Hand, quote, "Words are chameleons, which reflect the color of their environment," unquote. That thought is enhanced by the anonymous quote, "A writer lives in awe of words, for they can be cruel or kind, and they can change their meaning right in front of you. They pick up flavors and odors just like butter in a fridge." As if that's not enough, words can mean different things at different times. They come into existence to express thoughts by a group of people that share them at a point in time with a meaning that reflects their origin, use, and time frame. Take, for instance, the word awful. Originally, that word meant worthy of awe, as in very inspiring. However, over time, it has come to mean bad, displeasing, offensive, etc. A quick Google search will produce list upon list of terms that have changed over time.
Mhm.
So with that bit of confusion, I'll turn it over to Elisa Sanchez, who has an exercise for us. Elisa.
Okay, well, we're going to take more of a political look at this. This country, I think, is at a crossroads. And it's because we've got a polarized society, and we use words against each other that I'm not sure people understand what they mean. So let's start with the word, that I know that is, I hate to say this, but I guess I'm on the left. Although, I should say to the rest of you that Shirley and Charlie and I had a very interesting discussion getting ready for this. And so one of the things is that I think that all of us are liberal and I don't even see, I just used the word and I wonder, can you all tell me what does the word liberal mean to you?
Open-minded, progressive.
What does progressive? Okay, let's just stay with liberal. She says open-minded, progressive. What are other words that we would use to describe somebody who's liberal? Yes, Jack.
Liberated.
From what?
From anything. I think that's the root meaning of the word.
Mm-hmm.
You can be liberated from previous views.
From previous.
You can be liberated from some external force.
Dave?
As a liberal, I believe that there is a role for government in helping meet the needs of populations and people in our country, especially those who are disadvantaged or unable for whatever reason to address all of their needs. So I see a place for big government in improving our lives and our welfare.
And I want to add the planet and the animals.
Yeah.
Very good.
I didn't hear, what was that?
Yes.
Taking care of planet and the animals as well as people. That's what it means to be liberal. Yeah. We take care.
Okay, so did somebody else have, Jane, did you have a comment?
Well, I think that pretty much a lot of the terms that I might have used have been shared. But one of the things I do think about is that it typically identifies a party affiliation in our minds when we hear it. And yet I do know, you know, and the party affiliation is Democrat, but I know Republicans who are open-minded, care about finding solutions for people who are struggling economically, who need a leg up, and they just have a different way of accomplishing it. And I was compelled by what Dave said. As a liberal, I want the government to play an important role in that, rather than, whereas, you know, many of my Republican friends say, well, that's what we have philanthropy for. But for me, philanthropy makes people feel beholding, sort of degraded. And I'm not saying that all the philanthropy is bad, but you know, it doesn't. For instance, I would rather see them a government policy that would help have a living wage rather than people having to ask for a handout from a philanthropic source who is going to decide whether I'm deserving or not. You know, so it's a tremendously nuanced term.
Yes.
Let me go back to Jack. Jack, when let's give us an example of something that you feel liberated about.
Well, I didn't say I felt liberated. I just said that's but I will follow up on what Jane said. About 3 years ago in town, there was a popular bartender who had cancer, and people were trying to help him. He had no insurance. So several bars in town devoted one night of their income to help this man with his cancer. At about, I'd say 5 or 6 bars passed a hat around, and they raised maybe $7,000 or $8,000 for this man. Well, as Jane said, that's not the role of philanthropy. That's the government's role to provide health insurance for one of its citizens, so people don't have to go out and have a fundraiser so a person can get treatment for cancer. So maybe that's where we're liberated from.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things is, as I listen to all of you, I think to myself, we've said we want the government to do this. I think of the government is us.
It's us.
There is no government unless we pay our taxes. And so, you know, it's like when government produces things like Medicare or the ACA, or now because we're talking about health, you know, it's not, I guess socialism in the strict sense is something that is government created and government owned. I never think of anything like what our government does as something they own. If we as a citizens refuse to pay our taxes, all of those things are gone.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, that as citizens, I'm not sure that we step up enough to say, and this is where my conservative part comes in. I have no problem giving the government my money. I just want my money spent well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I do have problems with the amount of percentage that our government spends on the military. And it was a good Republican president who warned us about that. Eisenhower, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said,
Indeed.
beware of the industrial military complex.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, does anybody else have any thoughts about, okay, so let's ask the word Charlie, do you consider yourself a conservative?
I, more so than that's very difficult because
Well, tell us what you think when you think of yourself as a conservative.
as a conservative, I think about the fact that our country, despite our shortcomings and our problems we've had over the past, we have a system that allows us to correct for our shortcomings. And we have, so far as I can tell, we have been making progress over the past years. There are bumps along the way, surely, but we do have a system for taking care of these problems, for acknowledging the problems without having to go to jail for saying so. So I have a strong support for a conservative support for our form of government. Now, you can pick at it and say, well, that's not right and that's not right, but you can say so, and we can work on correcting that. And that is my conservative part. I think there's a lot worth conserving here.
But does anybody want to? Yes, Dave.
Oh, I'd just like to say, Charlie, that you have described me to a T as a liberal Democrat.
Oh, good deal.
Because I too believe that that we are trying to create and sustain a system that allows us as citizens participating in our government. And I really like what Elisa said about, we are the government, that enables us to make corrections, to identify problems and make corrections. So whereas you frame that as being a plank in your personal conservative identity, I see that as being as praising liberal democracy.
Wow, neat.
Well, I think that's a good example of how, things are thrown out. Oh, well, you liberals.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
it's without really thinking about what a liberal is. To me, being a liberal means to care. I care, I get really, like now with all of these rules and regulations that are being passed in all of these states, they're picking on trans kids. I just like, why? What have these little kids ever done to you? Can you imagine? I mean, it just really hurts my soul to think that some poor kid, is having this difficulty themselves. And then we, or some governments, are jumping on that. So I care that people be allowed to be what they are, as long as they are good people. And I think that we have a shortage of good people in this country today. It's more about, pointing the finger and being nasty. So anyway, but I before you say something, I wanted to start actually with this quotation, and I forgot. Margaret Mead said, "Do not underestimate the power of a small group of people to make a change." And one of the things that we talked about in getting ready for this is that, Charlie is feeling sort of left out because of the UU he feels is going more leftist. How do you, and I'm not a part of the church anymore, but I'm still talking about you. So how do you create an environment in that small group of people that everybody can then understand what are the words that you're using that don't turn people off, but that respect everybody who's there? And so any reactions? Jane, you were going to say something before, and
Well, that had caused me to have another thought. I think that the words we use are extremely important. And I try truly hard you know, based on now that I'm 82 and have spent a lifetime thinking about this issue, to not use language that shames and blames, because the people who have spoken, some said things that you know, I might object to. I can't really know. It comes back to knowing what these words really mean, what they really meant, unless I have a real dialogue with them. And if I start out by making them feel shamed, blamed, rejected, they're not going to want to talk to me. You know, that's human nature. That's just human nature. And you know, this is just bringing up all kinds of thoughts in my head because of the years that I spent teaching the Black children in Georgia just shortly after integration, and the time that I spent teaching Navajo and Hopi children in Arizona, and seeing a lot of suffering. But I never forgot that on the first day of the first week of class, when I started teaching in Georgia, when my husband and I moved to Georgia for him to take a job at the University of Georgia, he had to go off to Colorado for some kind of a research conference, and I got into the schools, and wow, that first week, I thought, this is the most horrible situation I've ever seen. These kids are using all their energy to try to kill each other and insult each other and so forth and so on. So he called me from Denver, and he said, how's the first week of school going? And I said, if you were home to take care of our girls, I'm telling you, I think I'd jump off a cliff, but I'm going to have to stay alive until you get home. So I sat down with my team of teachers and I said, you know, we can't really accomplish a lot of learning unless we do something about these relationships. And I think that we shouldn't even worry about how much we're accomplishing on reading, writing, and arithmetic the first month. We need to work on relationships between the children. And they agreed. And I agreed to be the person to sign up for Bill Glasser's class on how you conduct classroom meetings that the children run to deal where they could talk about their concerns and issues with certain guidelines. And another person in the team said that, and the other thing we need to do is go out and visit every home. And we agreed. We set up by the second month meetings to go talk to the parents and ask them what they hoped to get accomplished and what they were willing to do to help with this, and then say what we were willing to do. And it took 4 Sundays, you know, out of our family time. But I am telling you, doing these things was so valuable. By the end of the second month, the kids had developed some protocols for how to speak to each other respectfully, and a method at the end of every day when we would get in this, they would quickly take their chairs and form a circle, and each kid would take a turn leading the class meeting to talk about whatever issue or concern they wanted to. And by the third month, we were just really boogieing, and we had all the kids that the principal had built a building out in back of the school, so we wouldn't have to be bothered by what the teachers inside said about us, because we were recruited for the special purpose of working with the kids that were failing academically the most. Every kid on our team by the end of the year, it was a 4th, 5th grade combination, all 5th graders each year passed the test to go into the middle school. The building, the classes inside, they didn't, because they never dealt with learning first how to have respectful dialogue with each other so that you could feel good about the environment you're in and you could get on with the other work. So this is just evoking all those memories. And so I think that respectful speech is important.
Dave? Dave, you're
Thank you.
muted. Okay,
No longer.
right.
At the risk of putting Charlie on the spot, who is a man of great integrity and whom I have just a tremendous amount of respect for, would you be willing to share with us an example of a direction that you see the church taking that leads you as a conservative person less comfortable or uncomfortable? And if you don't care to, that's fine. I respect that. So I don't want to put you too much on the spot.
Could you give me a minute to think on it while people are discussing other things?
Sure.
Okay, so some of the other words that I think that that we use that have different meaning to different people is the word pro-life.
Yes.
So when you hear the word pro-life, what do you hear? Or what do you think, or what does it mean to you?
That they're against abortion.
Okay,
I think it's almost a radical being against abortion. You know, it's extremely against, not just.
Jack, did you have a comment?
Yes. I think it's a hypocritical term because the pro-life people are against healthcare, they're against education, they're contrary to any social program that actually would help a person. So to me, that's one of my reactions.
Yes, Dave. Oh,
No,
okay. Yeah,
Agreeing
Jack,
with Jack.
I absolutely agree with you. The thing is that when we hear it, we don't begin to think systemically. I think what you've just said is it's a system response to a word. And we don't do that. We just say, okay, well, then we get angry that people are against abortion or whatever. But I think that instead of getting angry, then we just need to speak up and say, okay, wait a minute. Are you pro-birth? Are you pro-life? If you are pro-birth, then you're probably against abortion because you think that this, but let's look at what happens when a child gets here. Does that child live in a family that gets paid a living wage? Does that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is Sister Chester, that a sister, and she does these beautiful things about this. What happens when a baby is born? And then do we do healthcare and food and living, et cetera? And so instead of just getting angry, we need to get into a conversation with whoever is throwing out these words. If they're, usually it's somebody on TV or something that we can't argue with, or have a conversation with, I should say. But Jack, thank you for bringing it up, because that's exactly what I think. When I think pro-life, I think, no, wait a minute. It's not pro-life, it's pro-birth. And we need to look at then what happens to a child's life. What kind of a life in New Mexico, the poverty rate for kids here is huge. Huge.
Yeah.
Are we fine with that?
I think it's interesting that the people who support a woman's right to choose are picking up on the pro-life term and appropriating it for themselves. I don't know whether you're hearing it, but I'm sure hearing it in many places where people are talking about the importance of family planning and having children when a woman being able to choose when and how far apart they have their children, so that they know that they're going to be able to take care of them. So they can determine the number of children and when they have them. And so we can turn these, we can expand on the meaning of term, that, you know, looking out for their well-being, as you're talking about, Elisa, when they're here, when they're born, is a very pro-life kind of stance.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, does anybody else have any terms that get pushed around or that, yes, David?
Well, I hope people won't find this trivial, but you all know that I'm an advocate for animals. And so I take objections to terms like owner. When my veterinarian staff refers to me as the person who owns my dogs, and I know that legally that's the status that we have, but I always correct them. I say, I don't own them, I'm their guardian. And you know, you may think that's trivial, but if you unpackage the meanings associated with words like owner versus guardian, the connotations put a different sort of responsibility on a guardian than an owner. An owner can buy and sell, can discard, can do whatever they choose to do with the object that they own. But a guardian is somebody who is taking responsibility for the well-being of this particular animal. So, I mean, and again, it may sound trivial, but I think that it helps to illustrate the importance that words have if you begin to unpackage them and try to understand the potential implications, the behavioral implications that might be associated with using, you know, different words to describe this, you know, sort of the same thing. In this case, it would be, you know, an animal, which I don't think is a thing. I think it's a soul and a being, you know. But at any rate.
Well, Dante, thank you, because, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking, as a liberal, I think what you've just described really describes me. It's like I care about the well-being about people around me, even people that I don't know. If they're human beings and we share a planet, then we're all guardians. That's a beautiful, I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Charlie, are you ready to make your little comments?
Elisa, yes, and we're friends. I mean, I love talking with you, but I'm going to take a sort of an opposite stance to something you said a little earlier, and but not in a mean way at all.
Don't worry about it. This is a discussion.
Right. I understand your feeling about not wanting to, I don't know, I'm not sure how you would put it. When you talk about trans kids in kindergarten or whatever, and you want them protected from these mean old people who don't want to have other lifestyles presented to them, because from my end, a person that young does not have enough mental development to distinguish between the various lifestyles that they might be heading into later in life. And so to present as normal a trans, which is very, very small percentage of the population at that age, to me is wrong. There are a lot of things we restrict teenagers from because their brains are not yet capable of making the proper decisions. And I think it, you know, going down to kindergarten, I'm not saying that we should pick on somebody who might think that they don't want to be trans because of whatever reason. Maybe their best friend has said something or whatever. I don't think we should promote that at that age. I think that should come in later if it's going to come in at all.
Reaction?
And see, that's what I thought of by myself.
No, well,
I think she referred to young children that young sometimes they have a feeling they're not a boy or girl like their parents treat them, but it takes time to develop with them as well as the parents in knowing how to treat them, how to honor their feelings or help them identify them.
Well, you know what, when you were talking, my thought was, you know, we've just said, the government is we the people. But when we talk about politics, there's this side that says the government can be good and can help. The other side says, we don't want government in our lives.
Right.
Yet, we're passing all these regulations and policies that then says the government is involved in a negative way. And that's okay. So, Charlie, I would say, you know, the rules and regulations that that trans was just one example, because right now there's so many things that are being passed that are anti-people. So we're sort of going to pick on Charlie here because he's on the other side.
No problem. I'm used to it.
but
But thank you for being here and for putting up with all of this. But anyway, you know, give me some, I'd like to understand, why is it okay for the government to step in and say things, you know, you will not have an abortion, you will do this, you will do that, you cannot vote in this way, if you think you're transgender, but on the other hand, you don't want government involved, but you want government involved here. Can you react to that? Or
VJ, you were going to say something?
No, I'm not, I'm just listening.
I'm not one who is totally against. Jack, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say what Elisa just described is I'll be kind to say that's the dilemma that the right has to live with. They want government out of their business. They want government out of personal freedoms, but they want to impose their will through the government on whether a woman should have a child or not. So, I mean, it's a hypocritical point of view, but that's the reality of it.
yeah, they want government out of our lives, but in my uterus.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And of course, that extends from something with which I do not agree, but there is reasoning on that side that you don't want to terminate life just because you want to terminate. I don't really care about abortion. I'm not one of these who thinks that abortions ought to be illegal. That really depends on when you think the person has developed into a person. And I just haven't taken an opinion on that.
Well, it also depends, Charlie, I think, on if a woman's carrying a child that's going to have severe deformities, handicaps, whether it's a good thing to bring life, that kind of life, into the world.
Mhm.
Yeah.
profound,
That-
profound, yeah.
Yeah, I perfectly agree that if there's no chance for a decent life, it ought not to be brought to be.
Jane, did you have a
So
comment?
there's,
Well, you know,
so
Jack, I'm sorry. I
I was
interrupted.
just gonna say, somebody has to
Good.
make the decision.
Could we ask people if you're not speaking to mute, because we're getting a lot of feedback?
put your,
I don't know, I am. I don't know if you are as well.
Yeah, somebody has to make the decision, and who should that be? Who in the final analysis decides whether a pregnancy goes to term or not? And if you say it's a judgment call, but who's best to make that judgment? The government or the individual person? And so, yeah, that's true. There are people who have abortions for trivial reasons. There are people who have abortions for profoundly important reasons. And as I think the Clinton administration kept saying, legal, safe, and rare.
Jane,
I think it's a really very good and promising sign that we're having this discussion today. And I'm thinking about this right now with regard to Charlie's example about the fact that some states are now passing laws, a few, that in kindergarten through third grade, there will be, you know, it seems that it varies from state to state what they're saying, but there will be no acknowledgement or discussion about the fact that some people have different sexual identities. Once upon a time, it would have been absolutely taboo to talk about any of this at all. And as a society now, we certainly show considerable respect for people who have certain identities, to act on those and to be open and honest about it, to men to be married, to women to be married. And what I do think, Charlie, you said that that you were, in your example, you were talking about the fact that for a child to be transgender, this was not normal. And I think that in fact, it's the point that many of us are making, that it is normal for different people to be different in this respect in terms of sexual identity. It is perfectly normal. Now, whether and people who've been proponents of having some kind of curriculum, what they've typically it has been is to show respect, to not make fun, to not you know, denigrate children who may be different and show signs of being different than what we once thought was normal, because it is normal to have these differences. There's considerable historical evidence that this is something that has always occurred in history, but has just not been acceptable in history. But I think it's so encouraging, first of all, that Charlie is so brave, and we'll talk about this and come up with an example that probably for many of us, we have a different view on it. I thank you for that.
Charlie, we got off on another thing, and Dave had asked you to be more specific about the church. Can you do that? Are you ready to do that? I don't want to lose that, because that.
Okay, but I can do that in a more general term. I was talking about a specific when you were talking about the laws that are preventing very young people from understanding transgender, from wanting to be transgender. Now, if somebody, let's say a 6-year-old, because of somebody he knows wants, or he or she wants to be transgender and gets pushed up through the ranks, gets operated on and so forth. My understanding is that there's a large percentage of those who end up committing suicide. I do not know all the specifics of it, but that's why I'm saying I don't think they're old enough to make those kind of decisions when they're in kindergarten or first or second grade.
And what I'm saying, I don't think that where there is some curriculum addressing this, that children are being urged to make decisions. I think they're being urged to be respectful of people who are different than they are, no matter what their orientation. That's what I think.
Oh, okay.
Just because of my experience in education and you know, as an educator and following what has been going on.
And see, that could very well be the case. But what I'm getting at is, rather than making emotional decisions without looking into it, we should be having this kind of a discussion as to whether it should be done or not. And Jane, you gave me a perfect example of the reason that I'm concerned about words. What percentage of the population is trans? Do you have an idea?
I at one time knew what the figure is, but I don't. Can you tell me?
I can't. I really don't know, but I think it's a very small percent. And when you refer to that as normal, you and I have a different understanding of normal.
So what would be your definition of normal?
If normal, I mean, I would expect normal to be more than 50%. And
so for you, it is normal is defined as a statistical thing that.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, that's okay. We do have a very different understanding of the word normal.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and you know, this could lead.
Go ahead.
This could lead to, you know, this is, I would love pursuing this, you know, some other time, because, you know, I know we can't do it all today, because this is just what I think Lisa is talking about. We have a different understanding of the word normal, and to go back and really examine it. When I'm doing emails, even, I'm actually often, before I use a word, I used the word rebuke the other day, and I thought I better look that up and see, does it really mean what I think it does in terms of how it is commonly defined. So, you know, for us to really think about, that's a huge thing, just to think about the meaning of normal. And it could lead to very different conclusions, I think, based on, it did in my case, a different conclusion than you, because I have a different understanding of what is normal.
Yes, Annetta.
Well, especially in the United States, I would say, as such a huge country with so many different people living in it, the population is made up of so many humans that represent so many different phenotypes. To come up with a normed population is impossible. It's just, you just have to throw up your hands to come up with people that fit into that fit into 50%, it's never, ever gonna happen. You know, you're gonna have to breed. You're gonna have to breed people to come up with 50%. We're talking science fiction here. Because, you know, there's people with, you know, blue eyes, and there's people with straight hair, there's tall people, short people, you know, fine boned, big boned, you know, people with long feet, short feet, you know, I mean, the variety of humans living here are so profound. To even talk about normal, you know, we're not fucking race cars. I'm flabbergasted, to say the least.
Well, you know what, Dave, we didn't get back to your question to Charlie. Yeah, Charlie, and you know, I don't know that we have any more time here, but Dave wanted you to really think about what specifically is happening at the church that makes you feel like it's going in one direction and not necessarily inclusive. Is that what you were saying, Dave?
Yeah, well, the comment that I heard you make, Elisa, was that in your planning meeting with Shirley and Charlie and you, that you had the impression that there are things that the church is sometimes moving in a direction that leads Charlie, as someone who identifies himself as a conservative person, feeling a little less comfortable and out of step with the rest of us. And part of my question is that to Charlie, and I really do apologize if that's put you on the spot, Charlie, is out of the strong affection that I feel for Charlie and the respect that I have for him. And you know, and because if he is feeling uncomfortable about what he sees as happening in the church, I would like, as a loyal church member, I'd like to know what that discomfort is, and if there's some way that we can address that in a mutually supportive and helpful way.
And I think that point is so important and well taken. And we should also be able to have those dialogues about people who are Black and people who are Hispanic. There's a whole range of people, and people who, one thing we do know, people who have different sexual identifications are, I think, feel very included in this church, and hooray for us. So maybe we need to look at how we manage to make that happen, and how do we include people who have a different political or it's really not a political or philosophical orientation that is so different than many of us who call ourselves liberal. And how does a person who's Black, how does a person who's Hispanic, how does a person who's Asian feel that feeling of inclusion and acceptance that we have extended to the LGBTQ community? It would be wonderful if we could figure that out.
That's your challenge.
Jack,
Go ahead, Charlie. Okay, thank you, everybody, on my part. Charlie?
Thank you.
Jack wants to say.
I was just going to say that we have to recognize that things do change. For example, in the Clinton administration, they championed Defense of Marriage Act, which said a marriage is between a man and a woman. 25 years later, the Supreme Court said marriage equality, you can marry someone of the same sex. Now that is a huge change in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's my observation I want to share.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. BJ, you want to
That-
say something?
Well, I
Hold
think
it, Hold it, let me turn off here.
n-
Okay.
now we are talking about again, what does marriage mean?
Well, I'm afraid we can't get into it now because isn't it already after 3 o'clock?
Hold that question. We should have a roundtable around it.
There you go. All of these words.
Hey, Jane, you have it.
Charlie, you have some parting words?
I do. I really want to thank everybody for participating in this. This is the sort of thing that
You're muted, Charlie.
You're
Muted,
Charlie.
Charlie.
BJ just muted herself. Hit your space bar. You're still muted.
You're still muted.
Okay.
There.
All right, now let's try it one more time. Yeah, see, this is the sort of thing, a group of people like this is just, I love it. I absolutely love it. With differing opinions that we can talk with each other. And my feeling of being on the fringe is that a lot of the what goes on at the fellowship is more, I hate to say this, but more emotional decisions than thought out. And that's just a generalization. But anyway, we're beyond time. And I want to leave you with this parting thought. Again, thanks much to everybody for showing up. Some of you would have heard this before. It's from Anonymous, 4 short lines. Be careful of the words you say. Keep them short and sweet. You never know from day to day which ones you'll have to eat.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Al.
everyone. This was a wonderful session. I feel so good about all of you all. So
Yes.
you.
All right.